Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time. Welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Now, last week we talked about leadership avoidance, a powerful topic that could also be caused by what we're going to be talking about today. So today we are kicking off a two-part series on a topic we believe is really important to discuss, and that is menopause and perimenopause. Now, in this two-part series, we have invited a couple of experts to join us to educate and give us essential information about menopause, how it affects us, not just from a medical perspective, but also in our careers too. So in part one, we have menopause coach, expert and keynote speaker, Lauren Chiren. Now, Lauren, have I said that correctly, Lauren, by the way?
That works, that works.
Now, Lauren is an entrepreneur passionate about supporting people to successfully navigate menopause. She left her senior role in financial services in her early 40s, believing that she was suffering from early onset dementia. Can definitely relate to that. Now, imagine her surprise when her doctor informed her she had just been through menopause. Now, today, surprising for sure. Now, today, she has educated over 400 FTSE and Fortune 353. Today, you've educated 400 FTSE and Fortune 350 employers on why being menopause supportive is business savvy, taking over 200,000 people through her free Menopause The Basics course. Now, she supports high-performing people to navigate the changes and challenges of all things hormonal, from monthly cycles to menopause. Now, as a trusted expert, Lauren has helped over 1,000 executives, celebrities, and athletes globally. She is qualified in psychology, mental health, nutrition, coaching, personal training, menopause, and much more. Wow. Welcome, Lauren. Obviously, we are delighted to have you on the podcast today for part one of the menopause series.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No problem.
Lauren, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you from Rachel, and I'm really excited for this conversation and just eager to learn more about you, your work, and what I have ahead of me coming up.
or not, hopefully. This is
not.
the whole thing. Yeah, it's all about changing the narrative and learning what we can do rather than all the horror stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So, Lauren, the mantra on your website is changing the narrative on menstruation and menopause one day at a time. Now, obviously, the experience of leaving your high-level career role was a catalyst for what you are doing now. Can you take our listeners and us through the moment and the journey you took to become the menopause expert you are now?
Yeah, the moment where, this was not planned. I can tell you that for a fact. This was not planned. But one of the things that happened was when I left work, I eventually went to my doctor because it was something I hadn't done up until that point. As a sole parent, had child lifelong medical needs, and I just never had time to do anything. Like I was either at work or I was looking after my son. There wasn't really much time and space for anything else. So when I left work, I went to my doctor. He was like, no, it's stress, it's low mood, you know, it's normal. You're a new mom. You've got a lot going on. You're in a senior role. Time for you to look after yourself. So I was like, all right, okay, whatever. And was very dismissive of what he had said. He also turned around and said to me, if you don't stop and take care of yourself, you're going to end up having a nervous breakdown. And then who's going to look after your son? And that got my attention.
Mm.
So I did take some time. I did invest in my own self-care. And then I went back to see him because, yeah, things weren't quite right. And he did some bloods. And I thought when I went back for the blood test results that he was going to say to me, look, you've only got this long to go before, you know, you have to appoint someone else to make decisions for you, find someone else to bring up your son, find somewhere for you to be looked after. And I was completely going to that appointment thinking, okay, I'm on a really short time frame here to get my affairs in order. And he turned around and said, you've just been through the menopause. I was the happiest menopausal woman in the UK. And that was the moment. That was the moment where I absolutely sat there and I stared at him and I was like, I've got background in psychology, anatomy and physiology, you know, human performance, lots and lots and lots of training over the years. Pure coincidence, really, but I've been studying and delivering human performance for years, and yet I was completely clueless about the impact of our hormones. And I thought, well, if I'm completely clueless, what chance have other people got? So that was the beginning. That was the beginning of me bringing people together and just exploring and learning and trying to navigate my way through it. And 10, well, nearly 11 years later now, I have, yeah, I keep waking up and pinching myself because it's not a journey that I ever planned, put it that way.
So, okay, so you thought that you were losing your mind, that you were going, you had dementia, and that, in your mind, you're going, my gosh, who's going to look after my son? I'm going to have to set some things in motion because, dementia means that I'm going to lose all my faculties. And yet, the actual thing that was happening was menopause. So, like, just take us through kind of some of the symptoms that you were experiencing that made
Yeah.
you believe that you were having dementia over menopause.
Yeah, well, remember, I'm in my early 40s. My son's little, and I'd had him at 37. So the last thing on my mind was anything other than being a new mum and looking after him. I also became a sole parent unexpectedly. So it was just me and my son. So one of the things that I thought perhaps that maybe this thing called stress was finally biting me in the backside. And it's something I've never ever had an issue with. I thrive in stress. I love challenge. You know, I'm one of those people that just bring it on, you know, give me a challenge and I get my teeth into it. I found myself sitting in meetings and I'd have to sip hot cups of hot water to relax my throat muscles enough to be able to squeak the smallest of sentences out because my throat was so tight with anxiety that I could barely speak up in meetings. Or in another occasion, looking at a colleague and going, I know her husband's name, I know her children's name, I know the job she does, can't remember her name. And then there was one meeting that I was sitting and I was holding on the arms of the chair and I was watching the clock tick down. And all I could do was hold on to the arms of the chair because my heart was beating out of my chest and I thought I was having a heart attack. I had no clue what was going on. That meeting happened, everyone left the room, and then I used the wall like Marcel Marceau wise, you know, to get back to my desk because I thought if I let go of something, I'm going to fall on the floor. So I had all these weird things going on, and my self-confidence, my self-esteem was absolutely rock bottom. I didn't trust myself to make business critical decisions anymore. And I didn't want to be seen as weak and vulnerable because I'm working in a really male-dominated environment, working in business critical projects and programs. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I'd not long lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's, and I just thought maybe that's what it is. And there was no hint of a hot flush. There was no hint of all the other kind of things that people talk about. And the other thing I think was quite interesting on reflection is my doctor thinks I probably became menopausal at 37 straight after I had my son. So I went straight from having him, I fed him for a year, so I didn't have a bleed. And then I was on contraception that you don't have a breakthrough bleed with. So I didn't have a bleed again after I had my son. So I had no real kind of like, oh, my periods are getting erratic or my periods are stopping or I'm having hot flushes. But the big thing for me, the biggest thing was not sleeping. I didn't sleep for 18 months at all. Like an hour and a half to 2 hours a night would be a good night's sleep.
Wow.
And that was the big thing for me. And my anxiety just went, you know, through the roof. Self-esteem, self-confidence through the floor. And I just got to the point where I was like literally looking over my shoulder and not trusting anyone, becoming quite paranoid. Because the big link between estrogen and oxytocin and serotonin. So if you've not got that bonding and trust with other people, you can start becoming really distant and second guessing everything that they're saying. So that was me. They were my symptoms. So not the usual things that people back then were talking about as being menopausal.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. What a, I mean, I think when you talk about your experience and how you thought you were going through one thing when realistically you were going through something else. I wonder how often that actually occurs in women where they're not thinking it's, menopausal. I know for me, I'm probably closer to entering perimenopause. So in all of your years of experience and all the research you've done and advocacy and bringing awareness about this topic to, so many people, as we've heard, what do you think are the most important things, maybe factors, symptoms that are related to this topic of specifically perimenopause that you think is really important to know for someone who's about to enter that chapter of their life?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to recognize it's a really natural time of life and we're going to go through it. If we've been born with ovaries and we've had, all that stuff going on with menstruation, we're going to become menopausal at some point. And that's a conversation I don't think we're having early enough. So I think it's really important that we understand the massive roles that estrogen, progesterone, testosterone have in our bodies. And I start that like we partner with companies, and what we do is we train people in their company to learn about the menstrual cycle. And then we support them to go into schools and work with girls age 14 and up so that girls learn how to manage their cycle, understand their menstrual health so that they can get help and support really early so it doesn't affect their studies. It doesn't stop them with their further education. It doesn't stop them those early, career moves that they're making, because too many people, especially in STEM, we see people going into STEM subjects and then dropping out within a few years because the workplace is just not set up to support people that have a monthly cycle and go through all the things that we would go through. So for me, the number one key thing is really getting that factual information into our brains. So the education is the first most important thing. When you understand the roles and the ebbs and flows of estrogen and progesterone and the fact that they've got a knock-on impact on our brain chemistry, on our digestive system, our bone health, brain health, heart health, then you can start to work with your cycle. And as you get into perimenopause, you're more sensitive to the changes in your body, the more sensitive to the changes in your moods and how you're feeling, and you know what to do to manage that and when to ask for help and support. So because culturally and around the world, right, we're in 3 massively different time zones, and in each time zone, people have different experiences of menopause. There's different cultural experiences of menopause as well. So I think it really for me is about less about the hot flushes and the period stopping, the erratic periods and the joint pain and the loss of self-esteem and self-confidence. But if we can just get people to understand what's going on and how their bodies really work, and the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis that are influencing that and making things better or maybe not so good, and then empowering people to ask for help and support in a really positive way so they don't get fobbed off by their doctors as well.
Right. I think that's really hard, especially for women to ask for help. I'm even just imagining how I would, handle that part of my life. And I have a hard time asking for help as it is. So I think the fact that you highlight that you have to ask for the help you need is really going to be a key message that people have to hear.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the experience you talked about just before must have been A, very confusing, B, very frightening, and also I think it's very easy to kind of label the experience as like stress, or perhaps in your case, maybe postpartum or something like that, and
Yeah.
it's like because we try to find answers for what we're experiencing, and yet the number one answer never seems to be, oh, you could be going through perimenopause or menopause, right? And let's face
Yeah.
it, like women go through this. You cannot avoid this. This is going to happen to you. And that's why we want to highlight it, because I think, as you experienced yourself, like doctors don't necessarily automatically go to talk about that. They certainly haven't with some of the things I've been experiencing. And I've been the one who's had to say, is it perimenopause? There's just not enough information. And workplaces certainly do not have enough information set up for dealing with women who are like yourself in very senior leadership positions, making, you know, decisions, and suddenly are not able to make those decisions for no fault of their own, through like, you know, a hormonal imbalance that we literally have no control over. So, you know, it's really important to support women in the workplace. And obviously this is something that you're very passionate about, and as a woman of a certain age, we believe that it's extremely important too. So, which is why we wanted to highlight this topic. What would you recommend other women and company leaders do to support women who are experiencing, you know, these potential symptoms of menopause in and outside of the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the first things that was asked of me when I started going to organizations, so it would be, what would you like to have had in place? What would you like to have had in place? And all the research that I've done over the last 10 years shows that typically someone will get to 3 or 4 years into their perimenopausal journey before they realize that's where they're at. And often what will happen is they might have this, you know, the heart palpitations, think they're having a heart attack or a cardiac arrest of some variety. They go to the emergency room, they go to the ER, the A&E, and they go through all these ECG tests. And then a few months later, they're back in the doctor's surgery. They're having an MRI scan because their hips and their knees and their wrists are really bad. And they think they've got the sudden onset arthritis. And
Oh my
before we
God.
know it, they're having migraines and, you know, hormonal headaches. And, you know, they think they've got a real problem with their brain, and they're having brain scans. And you've got all these isolated incidents over 2, 3, 4 years, and no one's sitting down and joining the dots and going, oh, you're in your late 30s or your 40s. Maybe this is hormonal shifts and changes. Maybe this is quite an easy fix. So for me, it's genuinely about having education programs in the workplace and access. And that's why I ran that free Menopause The Basics program, because many organizations back when I started didn't see the value in actually providing this education. It's different now. You know, now it's just regular. It's just part and parcel of what they're doing. But getting people to understand what menopause is, learning how to recognize it in yourself and in other people, and then knowing how to reach out and have a conversation, a confidential conversation. So how do you reach out to someone without saying, hey, are you menopausal? Because we don't want to be labeling people and it's not our place to say. But how do you notice in a colleague that something's not quite right? How do you reach out and have that sensitive conversation and help them access the right help and support? How do we make sure our private medical insurers, how do we make sure our employee assistance programs, how do we make sure our occupational health people are properly trained, and when they're doing their assessments, they're correctly signposting people? How do we make sure that when we send people to the doctor, they're properly set up with the right information so they get a good appointment and they're not brushed off and told them too young, or you can't have HRT, or it's something other than menopause, or you're too old, or, you know, just get on with it. That's what other generations did. Because this is what's happening. This is real. Even in the time of us recording this, this is still happening today. So for me, it's education, access to good quality resources, and changing the workplace so that we can adapt how we work. We don't want time off work. You know, we don't want to be absent from the workplace. But what's happening, because the workplace, the built environment and the culture isn't set up to support us, we end up with people going sideways, being present and not working, going part-time and leaving. And there was a great study done in Victoria in Australia, actually, where they had the whole healthcare service was offered as much time off as they needed for menstrual health and for menopause. And they put menstrual health products in all the toilets. And there was a real pushback on them doing this, because the assumption was that everyone would take the menstrual health products and they just take a load of time off. And what actually happened was the retention went up, the days asked for leave went down, and people only used the products when they needed them. So people were actually staying in post longer. So although it feels a bit counterintuitive, actually when you put the right things and right mechanisms in place for people that have cycles and go through menopause, it makes us feel like we belong. It makes us feel like we're being heard. It makes us feel supported. And what does that do? It makes us want to step up and do a better job, right?
100%. It's
So
not a disease.
no.
We just want help.
Yeah.
And Laura, what you're talking about really speaks to part of what should be an employee engagement strategy. That's how you retain your talented colleagues, by offering services to support their entire well-being while they're employed with that company. So I think that's remarkable. And actually, I'm glad that you talked about that, because it segues into this, you know, what I wanted to ask you, which was, You talked about part and parcel and the strategies that you've seen in Victoria that have worked so well. Do you have other stories or testimonials of success that companies have implemented specific strategies or even educational initiatives to support women going through this phase of life? And what
Yeah. So, I
actual
mean, as
tips
Rachel,
can you share
sorry.
with us that you've seen have worked?
Sure. And I think, to Rachel's point, during the introduction, I've worked with over 400 FTSE and Fortune 350 companies now. So, some of them will do like the one-off lunch and learn, tick the box. I've now done menopause. And I'm sure you've seen organizations do that with lots of things in the diversity and inclusion and well-being space. That just happens. And the bigger the company, the harder it can be to approach these things. If I'm working with an organization, specifically a large organization, we'll look at the company strategy over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, we know at the moment from 2025 to
Okay.
2030, depending when people are listening to this, that companies are looking to have more senior women in their senior leadership roles and their board positions. We know that companies are committed to the well-being of their people post the pandemic. We know that there is a big push with diversity and inclusion. Now, it's very easy for me to build a business case with the board that looks at, by being menopause savvy and supportive, you're going to increase your ability to hit those metrics much more easily. So we then look at what are the KPIs for each of the board members, for the senior leadership, and then look at how those KPIs ripple throughout the organization. And then we can start putting in meaningful training. That doesn't have to be standalone training. We can train managers, and we're not training managers on all the nitty-gritty of menopause, but we're training on the soft skills, the types of things a lot of organizations have skipped over. So how do you notice in a colleague they need help and support? What language do you use? How do you change your body language? What resources have you got in-house? How do you signpost someone? How do you follow up with somebody?
Yeah.
So we use a lot of disc profiling. We use a lot of, tried and tested ways of encouraging people to feel more confident, comfortable around this topic, because the goal is to have people feeling really comfortable, confident, competent to have these conversations. Because if we can get, what it's like, right? If a manager can notice that a colleague isn't on form and they can step in quickly before they've left it for 3 months and then they end up in a performance issue, it saves everyone. It's a win-win-win. It's a win for the manager, it's a win for the colleague, and it's a win for the organization. So if we can get those skills right, so that manager piece, then for the colleagues, have colleague training that can be gender individual, like for specific genders or for everyone together. We then train menopause coaches, menopause champions, and menopause mentors, depending on the organization and its needs and how it's structured. So they're qualified, certified individuals in the organization. And then, depending again on the structure of the organization, it might be policies or guidance documents. So that's the kind of core that we take clients on over a couple of years. It's not a once and done. It's repeated and it's repeated. So can we build that into the learning and development plan, into the training plan? Can we build it into the colleague journey? So when you're doing job design and you're doing person spec, are you thinking about menopause? When you're doing recruitment, are you thinking about, is this menopause savvy? Is this menopause friendly? When you're onboarding, again, asking the same question. So it's putting that DE&I and that well-being lens on the whole colleague journey. Are there questions in your engagement survey, right? So it's all these things. It's just about looking at it from a strategic point of view and then having tactical solutions in place that are going to be really impactful.
Wow.
Right. You're right. It's not about the isolation of having lunch and learn. It really goes beyond all of that to really embed it as a part of the employee's life cycle with their journey in the organization. I think all those strategies and initiatives that you just talked about really do put a good stamp on making this topic a core part of, regular conversation and how you support female colleagues in the workplace. Brilliant work,
Yeah.
Lauren. I mean, really,
Yeah.
I have not heard of anyone who does this before. So
No.
Well, I've just come back. I was in New York last
that's
summer,
amazing.
doing lots of work over there. Apparently, I'm coming over to Sydney, in September, October next year. So I'll be doing some work over there as well. But I've trained people in those areas to do this work as well. So that's part of the beauty of what I get to do.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is really incredible and obviously quite groundbreaking because, this conversation is only really just coming up now. And I think my perspective on this, and I'm interested in yours actually, Lauren, on this, is it because we do have more women in those leadership roles, those C-suite roles, and obviously we are experiencing it, and therefore we must talk about it because we can't ignore it anymore. So yeah, potentially that's the reason why. I like to think that, you know, like the people who are up there, then they have to do the work for the people below us, because the people coming up are going to be like really angry with us if we didn't have this conversation, right? And rightly so. One of the things you said there was around the conversation. Now, obviously, menopause itself can be used against women, you know, a lot of the time, because oh, are you menopausal, you know, like that kind of thing. How should somebody handle that kind of conversation if they are?
Okay, so in the US, first of all, I encourage my clients to be aware that under the Americans with Disability Act, there is actually cover. So we're not saying that someone going through menopause is disabled at all, but technically, someone going through an experience in life where they have an impact on their day-to-day life for a significant period of time, which usually 12 months. So the Americans with Disability Act in the States, the Equality Act in the UK, and there's something similar in Australia as well, and different parts of the world have got different ways of covering this. So there is protection for employees. So there is the technical side of it, and just warning managers that they could end up in an employment tribunal, they could end up in a tricky situation if they don't support their colleagues, is the kind of stick way of doing it. But the carrot way of doing it, I always say to people, look, you know, be mindful of your language, be thinking about how would you want to be treated, or your loved one be treated if they were in that situation. So it's that kind of treating someone as a human being. It comes back to the absolute basics of being kind and compassionate. And the more someone feels like they belong, the more they're going to perform, and that's better for your team. So people, I think, take that behavior on board when they're in a fearful situation. And people make a joke and they laugh at someone else's expense when they don't know what else to do. So if we can empower people with the knowledge, and like you said, you know, women are working longer and later into life than they've ever done before. Women over 50 are the fastest growing economically active group worldwide. So when we think about the fact that there's going to be 1.2 billion people in menopause by 2030, the world has to change, right?
Wow, yeah.
So education, education, education. And, you know, always, you know, people say to me, well, how do I bring men to the table? How do I bring the older women to the table that don't, you know, they've managed their way through it. They've held down their positions, and they don't want to talk about it. Well, actually, you know, this is a big change that we have to bring on board. So we have to think about what's in it for them. How are they going to benefit from coming to the table and changing their way of thinking about and interacting with people going through menopause?
Yeah, true. Very good. Yeah.
Well, Lauren, I mean, just one final question, if I can ask, just as a way to, you know, sort of summarize this whole chat with you, which has been phenomenal. I feel like I've learned so much. You've shared a lot of insights with us, but how do you think women can truly prepare themselves mentally, physically for this part of their life's journey?
I think, first of all, just be mindful that, you know, when we get to menopause, we're only halfway through our adult life. So we have periods for about 37 years, and then we live for about another 37 years after menopause. So what a celebration, right? We've done the hard we've done the hard graft, we've done the managing and juggling everything and the periods with everything else. And now we get to live our life without having to worry about those hormonal fluctuations. We can wear the white trousers again. We can do so many things that we, you know, without fear after we go through menopause, right? So I see this as if we can culturally change how we think and behave about menopause, this is us stepping into our power. This is us stepping into our personal power. It's an opportunity to boost our vitality, to use our voice in a way that we've never done before. And I think that when we start to change the narrative of menopause, we can see it as something to really work towards. But from a practical point of view, talk, learn, ask for help and support, drink more water, learn how alcohol and sugar affects you. Okay, some people are fine with it, some people are not, but find out, how do you respond to alcohol and sugar, because they can be some of your worst enemies during that journey through your menopause transition. So if I can encourage people to move their body more, drink more water, and get a better night's sleep, you know, sleep is something that can be so detrimental during menopause. So I always say to people, when you get a really good routine going during the night and a really good routine in the morning, because how you set yourself up for success in the morning is the beginning of you setting yourself up for your good night's sleep. So you're not alone. You've got 1.2 billion sisters and brothers in the world going through menopause. We've got to be mindful of our transgender, non-binary and gender questioning community as well. So we want to really let people know you're not alone. And there is someone very close by who cares, who loves you, who is ready to support you as well.
Yeah. And, you know, it's really important for us, our listeners who are in the workplace right now and potentially, you know, experiencing some of this stuff. It's like, you are not alone and you do still belong, and potentially some of the things that might be happening to you in the workplace are a result of, you know, perimenopause. So talk to your doctor, or at least find a specialist, right? Then we're going to have a specialist menopause nurse on the next episode, the second part of this series, to kind of really talk about that angle. But yeah, I mean, push it, really. I had to push, like, hey, this isn't just one isolated, as you said at the very start, it's not an isolated incident. It's not an isolated, because you can have all of these things. I had really bad vertigo and I was like, I'm going insane, and really bad migraines that I just said, I cannot live like this. Something has to be done. So, Lauren, this has been a fantastic and eye-opening episode. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and information with us. The work you're doing is incredible. If anyone listening is interested in connecting with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn, if they're on LinkedIn, or the website. So womenofacertainstage.com.
Wonderful. Lauren, again, thank you so much for being with us here on the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast and educating us about such an important topic. It's been so great getting to know more about you, your journey, and of course, this topic of menopause.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with a thought, how are you supporting women, or even yourself, in the workplace through perimenopause and menopause? If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you can share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you could rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for another great episode in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.